Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ohio Voices Informing Energy Choices, brought to you by the Black Environmental Leaders. The Black Environmental Leaders Association purpose is to create space for minorities and BIPOC folks around our region to have a space to be transparent, uplift the work we're doing, and also educate. And so tonight we have two women is joining us from the League of Women Voters who are going to let us know everything we should know before we head to the poll. There's a lot of things going on in Ohio. I'm excited to see the turnout that happened in our special election and want to make sure that everybody has the tools and information when you go out to vote this November because it's very important from Ohio. So with that, I will introduce Nazek first from League of Women Voters. Please introduce yourself to our audience and give us a little bit of your background.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here tonight and to make sure that all of you have the information that you need to make sure that you can cast your ballot in the way that is best and easiest for you. I am the Policy Affairs Manager at the League of Women Voters of Ohio, and I do all things voting and elections, education and advocacy there. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Elisabeth.
Thank you, Ms. Nazek. My name is Elisabeth Warner. I do communications for the League of Women Voters. I am actually fairly new. I've been here less than a year. I hear that you always feel like you're new here at the League because there's always new laws and things happening. So if you ever feel confused about what's going on in the world of elections, know that you are not alone. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you guys tonight. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And so I'm so excited that you all have prepared a presentation for our audience tonight. It just gives us a general overview of what to expect where you're going to the polls. We're going to talk about some of the issues that are on the ballot. If you haven't gotten your League of Women Voters voter guide, I know a lot of folks down here in Southwest Ohio and across the state utilize that resource. So with that, I will hand it to the League of Women Voters.
Well, hi. So if you don't know us yet, we are the League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. If too long didn't read, our main mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. Next slide, please. So here is what we will talk about tonight. We're going to talk about getting ready to vote in this election. We'll talk about registering to vote, 3 ways to vote, required voter ID, special circumstances, and tonight we're going to cover student voters, incarcerated voters, uniform and overseas voters, and voters with disabilities. We'll talk about provisional voting, and we'll talk about resources. Okay, so to register, to vote in the election that's happening right now, you must have registered by October 10th. So that date has passed, but if you have not registered, you can absolutely still register for the next election. And you can also volunteer to support folks in this election too. So you can absolutely still be involved. Okay, so what will be on our ballots when we go to vote? Some folks are already voting. Early voting is happening now, and then election day is this Tuesday. So on everybody's ballot this year are 2 statewide issues. One that you may have heard a lot about is issue 1, which is reproductive health care. It is not the same as the issue 1 that happened in August that we all voted on, which is confusing and frustrating, but here we are. So this is definitely a different election. And then issue 2 is a statute. So the first issue, issue 1, is a constitutional amendment. The second one is a law that would make recreational marijuana legal in Ohio. Everybody's going to be voting on that, but then everybody after that has different things that they're voting on. So some people will vote for mayor or for city manager, city council members, board of election members, municipal judges, local bonds and levies. So everybody has a little bit of a different ballot once we get past the statewide issues. Next slide, please. Okay, so are you registered to vote in Ohio? Even if you have registered, even if you voted a bunch of times, it's really important that you check your voter registration before every election. You can do that at the Secretary of State's website, or the easy thing to remember is just voteohio.gov. To register, you have to provide the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, or your driver's license, or your state ID. You do need to be a US citizen. You need to be 18 years old on or before Election Day. And just a quick side note there, folks who are 17 now, but will be 18 by Election Day, they can register now too. Again, that date has passed, but people who are a few weeks or months before turning 18, but they'll be 18 by the next election, they can always register ahead of time. And then you need to have lived in Ohio for the last 30 days. So another important thing is whether you have moved recently. Voters have to update their voter registration every time that they've moved. If you don't update your voter registration by the deadline, you can go to the polling location for your current address, or you can submit a change of address. You might have to vote on a provisional ballot. That is not fatal. It is okay. Pro tip, voting a provisional ballot is not ideal, but it is still a great option. And Nazek's going to talk about that later. Next slide, please. Okay, so in Ohio, we're actually pretty lucky. We have 3 ways that we can vote. We can vote by mail, we can vote early in person, or we can vote on Election Day. Next slide, please. So right now we have early in-person voting, and that is at our boards of elections. Today it is going until 7:30. Tomorrow it is 7:30 until 7:30 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. And then there are weekend hours too, and we'll show those in a moment. To vote early in person, you need to have your unexpired photo ID. So even in the past, we didn't have to provide a photo ID when we voted at early voting centers. Now we do. So make sure that you have an unexpired ID with you when you go. The other option is to vote by mail. So people can vote an absentee ballot, and really absentee ballot and voting by mail are often sort of used interchangeably. Technically, absentee voting is early in person too, but just think of it as voting by mail. So people request a ballot. The deadline to have requested a ballot has passed. So if you haven't gotten one for this year, you're not going to be able to. So keep that in mind for next time you vote. If you do want to vote by mail, that you do need to do that a little bit ahead of time. But once you've ordered an absentee ballot, you don't need to have a photo ID. So that can be a real benefit for folks who don't have IDs. So sometimes that's college students or just people who don't have a photo ID. So the deadline for that was the 31st. But then there's also the classic voting on Election Day. So that is this Tuesday on the 7th, and that you do have to have an unexpired photo ID as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are in the last few days of early voting. So tomorrow it is 7:30 to 7:30, and then on Saturday it's 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. On Sunday it's 1 to 5. We do not have the Monday before the election as an early voting day. We used to, but that's one of the things that changed this year. And then Election Day proper, if you are classic, then that is 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Some polling locations may have changed since the last time you voted, so make sure that you look that up, and you can go to the Secretary of State's website and it will show you your polling location. You can just put in your address. Okay, to vote in person, and this is true for early vote this weekend or for when you go into your neighborhood polling location on Tuesday, you have to have a photo ID. Your ID needs to have your name and your picture, and you can only show an unexpired Ohio driver's license, Ohio state ID, US passport or card, US military ID, Ohio National Guard ID card, or US Veterans Affairs card. Your ID address does not need to match your voter registration address, and you can vote with an interim or suspended driver's license if you have a physical copy of it. And here are some examples of some beautiful IDs here. If you do not have a driver's license or an Ohio state ID, you can get one. You can get a free Ohio ID card from the Ohio BMV. If you are 17 or older, you can do that for free. If your ID says non-citizen, but you are a citizen now, you can get a free replacement with the non-citizen label for free. Another option is to go to an organization called Vote Riders. They are a nonpartisan nonprofit that helps anyone get a free ID. And their website is voteriders.org/Ohio, or you can call 866-ID to vote. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, the deadline for the request to mail in your ballot has passed. But if you have requested your ballot and it has not arrived yet, you can go to your county board of election to track it. So just go to either your county board of elections directly or voteohio.gov, and you can look it up there. And that way you can do that after you voted too. And it's kind of amazing because it tells you exactly where your vote is in the counting process. And for nerds like us, there is nothing more satisfying than seeing a text or an email that says, we have gotten your ballot or your vote has been counted. So that is kind of a great thing to be able to look at. If you have, oh, Nazek, can you go back for just a second? Thank you. If you have received your ballot, get it in the mail today. Follow the instructions carefully to complete your ballot, and then get your ballot in the mail as soon as possible or to your board of elections. The ballot has to be postmarked by the day before the election. So we're getting a little close at this point. I would honestly recommend taking it to your board of elections right now, or taking it to the post office and taking it inside so you can see them do a postmark with it. Okay, next slide, please. So how to vote and prepare your mail ballot. You might think, well, it's really obvious. I just fill it out and I put a stamp on it and I put it in the mail. And it basically is that, but there's something that happens when you're doing it that, at least for me, you kind of feel like, wait, maybe it's not that obvious. So just sort of take a deep breath. Fill in your ballot to the issues and candidates that you want to vote for. You do need to use a black or blue pen. Fill in the ovals completely. When you sign it, make sure that your signature is the same signature that you've always used, because if it looks a lot different than the signatures that they have on record, it could flag your ballot. So it's easier to just use the one that you've always used. Now is not the time to experiment with a new fancy signature. Okay, so you've signed it, you've filled it out, you are ready to go. You put it in the security envelope. You fill out all the information, including your signature, and then it comes with an additional envelope, and that's the carrier envelope. And so you put your security envelope into the carrier envelope and then seal it. Typically, we say 1 stamp per page. So if you have a really fat ballot, like 3 pages, put 3 stamps on it. Okay, next slide, please. So again, get it back to your board of elections as soon as possible. There are 3 options. You can take it to your county's official drop box. Every county has a drop box that people can put their ballots in. They are open 24 hours a day, and they will be until election time. You can also mail your ballot. Again, because we are starting to get pretty close to the end, I would strongly recommend that you take it inside your post office and get a postmark that is before the day before the day before the election or before. And then it would need to arrive by the 13th. But as long as you have it postmarked by the 6th or before, you are good to go. And then the last option is to deliver your ballot in person to your county Board of Elections, not your polling location. So if you still have your ballot on election day, don't take it to your neighborhood polling location. Take it instead to your county Board of Elections, and that needs to be in by 7:30 that night, the time that the polls close. And it can be you who delivers that ballot or a very close family member. Okay, next slide, please. How do I know if my mail-in ballot was counted? So again, you can track your ballot at voteohio.gov/track, or you can go to your county Board of Elections and you can put in, you could just search for tracking and you'll be able to find a way to do that there. And you can be notified when your county Board of Elections receives your request, and then when it mails out your ballot, when it receives your voted ballot, and then when it has counted your vote. So again, super satisfying, highly recommend. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is for folks who have slightly more complicated situations. And this is where Nazek is going to take over. Thank you, Nazek.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. All right, so I'm going to take you through a few different situations. The reality is that although we do have a lot of allowances in Ohio for different ways for different people to vote, it is more difficult for some people to vote than other people. And there's definitely things that you need to know that would make it easier for you if you fall into like one or more of the following categories. And if we don't address something that in these coming slides that you feel like is a barrier for you to vote, please feel free to reach out to us now or after this webinar. You can always call us or email us, and we're happy to work with you to make sure that you have access to your right to vote. So what should I do if I'm a college voter? I'm going to preface with this, because we are just a few days from Election Day, my advice is going to be a little bit different than what it would normally be. For the categories of people that I'm about to talk about, most of the time, my advice is going to be try to vote by mail. And that is because a lot of these people, it is more difficult for them to have access to a photo ID, and voting by mail oftentimes is their best chance. So keep that advice in your back pocket for the future, basically, that we still have another very big election not too far from now. The presidential primary is going to be in March. And then we have of course, a presidential election next year in November. All, very important. Every election is important. But again, if there's something that we can't help you through right now, this is all really important advice that you can carry with you in the future. So if you are a college voter, know that you have the right to decide where you want to register to vote if you consider yourself away from home. So if you are an Ohio student, but you are away from home, or if you are an out-of-state student and you are away from home. So for example, I am from Cleveland or I am from Michigan and I am attending the Ohio State University. I have a right to consider home or my dorm my residency for voting purposes. And that is your choice. It can't be both. It can only be one, but you can decide which one you want, and you can actually renew that decision every time an election comes about. You have the right to make that decision every time that there's an election. But you just have to make sure that your voter registration status reflects where you want to cast your ballot. If you live on campus, but you want to maintain your family's residence for voter registration purposes, then you should probably vote by mail, because it might be difficult for you to get back home, wherever home is, and cast your ballot in person, whether it be early or on election day. But you can have your mail ballot come to your campus residence, even if you are registered wherever, anywhere else. excuse me. And students are notoriously, and young people are very transitory. And so you should just be conscious of regularly needing to update your voter registration status every time you move, whether it be like year to year, from dorm to dorm or dorm to apartment. And then afterwards, if you're leaving the state or moving to another place, again, always make sure that every time you move, you're updating your voter registration to reflect your new address. Voters that are out of state, we tell them that you should ideally not have to get a new ID or driver's license if you don't think that you are staying in Ohio, because that can have some other kinds of effects that would be really inconvenient for you. And so again, these are, you know, a little bit kind of late for right now, but if you're voting, you know, if you're voting in the next election on election day, for example, on November 7th, your best bet in that case, if you don't have a BMV issued photo ID, you can vote with a passport. A passport is a valid way for you to vote. So what if you are currently or previously incarcerated? So there is unfortunately a very big misperception that anybody who is incarcerated for any reason does not have the right to vote. And actually that is very wrong. You actually can vote if you are otherwise eligible. So we talked about voter eligibility towards the beginning of this presentation. If you meet those criteria, you can vote if you are imprisoned for a misdemeanor, if you are imprisoned for a misdemeanor crime, or if you are confined while awaiting trial. So on any given day in Ohio, unfortunately, there are 10,000 people or more in our county jails awaiting trial. They have not been found guilty of anything, and yet they are, you know, incarcerated. You have the right to vote if you're incarcerated waiting for trial. You also have the right to vote if you are serving probation or serving parole. You cannot vote if you, sorry, there's a typo here that says you, oh, I'll go back there, that says you cannot vote if you're serving probation or parole. That is not correct. You can vote if you are serving probation or parole. But these are, I'm sorry, there's some typos here. So do not, this should actually say that you cannot vote if you are in prison for a felony offense. Again, you cannot vote if you are in prison for a felony offense. And but however, if you serve your sentence and then you are released, you can vote. You just need to register to vote again wherever your residency is. If you are in a county jail serving for a misdemeanor, or you are awaiting trial, your voter registration residency would actually be your most recent place where you were living. And if you need help with that, you can call the League of Women Voters. Or if you know somebody who needs help with that, you can call the League of Women Voters and we can help walk you through those steps, as they can be a little bit difficult. The easiest and best way for a person who is in prison to vote, or rather a county jail to vote, is to do so with the help of two election officials. There's a special form that you can fill out in which a person who is in a confined setting can have two election officials come and administer their vote to them while they are in the county jail. In some counties, they have a really good system that's set up. This was mostly before COVID. Things have gotten a little complicated since then, where you will have multiple people, because there's a lot of activism in a certain area. You'll have multiple people in a jail who are registered to vote and have filled out this application, and two officials will come from the Board of Elections and administer the vote in person to anybody who wants to vote, but you need to have filled out that form. Your other option is to vote by mail, but that can be a little bit complicated and would require the assistance of somebody from outside the jail. UOCAV voters, people who are living overseas, have the right to vote. Your voter residency for that purpose would be the last place that you lived. People also serving in the military have the right to vote. Most of the time, we tell people to use the federal postcard application to register to vote and to cast their absentee ballot. And the laws that kind of apply to people who are living overseas and want to cast a ballot are mostly federal laws. You can fill out an absentee ballot request form on behalf of somebody living overseas, but again, we typically tell people to do so through the federal postcard application. And there's a lot more information about this on the Secretary of State website. So what if I have a disability? If you have a disability, you should know that every polling location is required to have accessible parking, accessible entrance, and accessible route to the voting area. Every polling location should have curbside voting. That means that you can park your car. You don't have to get out of your car. Somebody would come and administer your vote to you in your car, and every polling location should have at least one ADA compliant voting machines with all different kinds of features that would help people with any number of disabilities. You can ask anyone to help you to vote. You can bring someone with you to vote. There's just a few exceptions there. You cannot ask an employer. You cannot ask an agent of your employer, an agent of your union, or somebody whose name is on the ballot and running for an election. The hard thing here is that while there are a lot of allowances and exceptions for people to make sure that they have access to their ballot, this system unfortunately does not always work the way that it should work. And so we always tell people who have a disability, the main thing to know is that your disability cannot and should not prevent you from casting your ballot. Most of the time I tell people to cast a mail ballot, vote, to apply for your mail ballot and to cast your ballot by mail. Again, it's too late for that, but you can go vote early at your Board of Elections or in person on election day, and there is nothing that should prevent you from doing so. But there are things that you need to know. So for example, every polling location should have curbside voting, but they don't always have the staffing capacity to make that look the way it should look. There should be a curbside voting sign outside where you have your own special parking. There should be a number where you can call and somebody would come out to you. But there's a presumption, unfortunately, sometimes that somebody's with you and that they would go inside for you. We're going to tell you a little bit more how to make sure that you can get the help that you need if you're running into any trouble. But just keep in mind that you have the right to vote and you have special allowances for you in order to make sure that your disability is not preventing you from voting. Know also that nobody can ask you what your disability is if you say, I have a disability, and you don't have to prove that you have a disability. What if I am not cisgender? You should know that the name on the voter roll, if the name on the voter roll matches the ID, you can vote. That's the bottom line. The gender on your ID does not need to match your physical presentation. They cannot give you any kind of, they cannot question you about that or give you a hard time about that. Transgender Ohioans are now able to change their sex marker on their birth certificate. This is relatively new. So that might be something, if you fall into this category, something that you might want to take a look at. An individual can cast a regular ballot by providing a proof of name change and filling out a Form 10L at either their early voting location or their election day place if your name does not match what's on the voter roll. So if you're cisgender and if you are not cisgender, if you are transgender, and if you recently changed your name, then you can file that form in order to make sure that you can cast your ballot with your current name. Okay, provisional voting. Provisional voting is used to record a vote when there are questions about your eligibility, or rather a voter's eligibility, and we'll talk a lot more about that. So a provisional ballot can be used in any number of circumstances, but it's basically if you show up and somebody tells you, like, you're not on the voter rolls, or you're not qualified to vote, or you don't have what you need in order to be able to cast your ballot. If so, some different situations could apply here. So, for example, your name doesn't appear on the official poll list because you've moved and you haven't updated your voter registration. The voter doesn't have the required ID. If you have asked for a mail ballot and you didn't vote your mail ballot, if you show up on election day, your name is not going to be in the voter rolls and you will have to cast a provisional ballot. If your signature does not match the signature on the registration form, again, you might have to cast a provisional ballot. One thing I want to say about signatures, again, Elisabeth mentioned not time to, sorry, can you? If your name does not match your, if your signature, if you're having trouble with a signature because of a disability, before you sign at the poll, let the person there know that you have a disability, and you will only be required to mark an X. You are not required at that point to match your signature. Know also that if you have moved, you can cast a provisional ballot, but you cannot cast a provisional ballot in the wrong place, in the wrong polling location. So if I, for example, if I lived in Columbus and I moved to Dublin, I can't go wherever, I can't go to my old polling location in Columbus. I have to go to the voting location of my new residency, and then I would cast a provisional ballot at my new residency. Okay, so after casting a provisional ballot, if you provided acceptable proof of identity, you do not need to do anything. If you do not provide acceptable proof of identity at the time of voting, you have to appear in person at the Board of Elections to provide that proof within 4 business days. So this time, election day is always on a Tuesday. That 4 business days lands on the following Monday. So by the following Monday, you'd have to show up at the Board of Elections. If you have changed your name, but you did not provide proof of a legal name change when you showed up at the polls, then you would need to bring proof of that legal name change, like a court order or a marriage certificate, for example. You would need to bring that to the Board of Elections by that Monday, so for 4 business days. If you cast a provisional ballot, well, let me back up for a second and say, if a poll worker tells you you can't cast a regular ballot, you can only cast a provisional ballot, your provisional ballot will count. There's a really awful misconception that provisional ballots don't count. They do count. They just have to get verified by the Board of Elections within a certain number of days. And that's why our election results are actually not final until 10 days afterwards. You might have heard of races, for example, where the winner is not apparent so soon after, on election night or by the following day because it's a really close call. That means that they are counting provisional ballots and mail-in ballots and all of the things. Sometimes the winner is apparent and it doesn't matter how many provisional ballots come in after that, but still every ballot counts. If somebody won by a landslide, yeah, the provisional ballot maybe is not going to make a difference in the result, but still they count all of those provisional ballots and they are they show in the final results. So really important for you to know that. If you end up casting a provisional ballot, make sure you ask for follow-up instructions. They will tell you exactly what you need to do before the deadline to make sure that your ballot counts. To check if your vote counted, you can check the website, the County Board of Elections website, or call them, and they will be able to provide you with that information. So we want to let you know that you should keep this number on hand. 866 Our Vote is the number of election protection. You can call or text that number if you have any questions at all, or if you run into any trouble while voting. If you keep the number on hand, and if anything happens, if you need to cast a provisional ballot and you're not sure that that's the right thing to do, if the poll worker is telling you that you don't have the right ID, but you're not really sure whether to trust them, it does happen. Poll workers make mistakes. And so we're here, we're your backup. You can call us and you can ask us, this is what's happening, is that right? There are 866 Our Vote is a huge nationwide coalition. The League of Women Voters of Ohio is a member in Ohio, is one of the managing members in Ohio, and we monitor that line all month long during early voting and on election day. And we are here to help you through any questions that you have. And there are also there's also language support in Spanish, Arabic, and Asian languages. And that is the end of our presentation.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I think it really simplified, all of the options of voting that our audience can understand. So to our audience, to reiterate, there is no excuse not to vote this year. You can vote if you have been formerly incarcerated and you are re-registered. You can vote if you have a disability. If you're not at home and you're in college, you can still vote. If you're overseas, you can still cast a vote. It's important for you to just make sure that you're aware of all the deadlines to vote by mail, to early vote, to cast your ballot, to put in any requests. If you are sitting in a county jail, there are options for you to vote. And I really want to uplift that piece because that's our most vulnerable population who a lot of times gets the raw end of the stick when it comes to a lot of these laws that these legislators that we're voting for, even the judges. And so I think it's super important that we always uplift that, because even if you're going through trial, you have a choice to say, hey, this judge is not a good judge, and still be able to cast your vote and speak to your true life experience in that system. And so I think it's very important that we continue to uplift that. And so we have a question from our audience, and it says, will my vote count if I do not have a stance on a certain issue and keep it blank? And what if I mess up my ballot? How do I correct it?
So the first question, if you have either a mail ballot, like a paper ballot that you return in the mail, or if you're voting on a machine on election day or during early vote, and if you choose to leave any one of those things blank, that question will not count for you if you don't want to answer that question for the issue or the race, but whatever you do answer will be counted. So that is very normal. Actually, if I look at statewide results for an election, oftentimes every time the number of votes is not going to be consistent across all the races, because some people are only going to vote for 2 out of 5 races, or 3 out of 5 races, or sometimes 1 out of 5 races. And so we want you to vote for, we want you to make sure you fill in all the bubbles, like all the ballots, all the races, but you have the right to keep any one of those empty if you are not sure about them. And then the second one was, what if you spoil your ballot? If you have a mail-in ballot and you spoiled it, you actually have 3 tries. And you can just call the Board of Elections and say, hey, something happens to my ballot, or I made a mistake on my ballot, and they'll issue you a new one.
Do you have to submit that request in a time frame when we look at like early ballot requests, or?
Yeah, that's a really great question. If you have already submitted your request, but you we're past the deadline now, but you made a mistake on that, then no, you should be just fine. If you run into that situation, let us know. We'll help you through that. But you should just be able to show up at the Board of Elections and either vote early while you're there, or you can ask for another paper, because your application already went in. It's not a matter, you don't have to actually fill out another request form.
And some people change their mind and decide they want to vote in person rather than voting absentee, and that's okay too. So you just have to let folks know at the Board of Elections. They'll take care of you.
Another question that came from our audience: who do you call if you face intimidation at the polls? I know last election season there was a lot of intimidation with trucks and flags and people just being, kind of scared off to vote. Is there a number that they can call when they experience that?
That's a great question. 866 Our Vote. We actually have election protection is a huge operation. We run that number, but we also have statewide volunteers that poll monitor all over the state. We are not in every corner of the state, but we're in the 7 most populous counties. And we have poll monitors all over the state, and likely somebody who can get to you pretty fast if we don't already have a poll monitor at your voting location or at the Board of Elections there. I will say, if you are facing immediate danger and if you feel threatened, it might be a good, I know not everybody likes to call the police as a first go-to, but if you feel like there's immediate danger, I would say calling 911 or calling the police would be your first go-to. But that 866 Our Vote number, definitely, for example, if you show up and there's somebody blocking the parking lot, which unfortunately we've seen all too often, call us. We'll get there and we'll help resolve the situation, and we often have. I want to say also that we have our poll monitors, which help people answer questions about voting on site. They rove at different polling sites and they make sure that everything is going well, and they are voting experts and can answer all of your questions. But we also have our peacekeepers, and they are especially trained in de-escalation techniques and conflict management, and they show up when any kind of problem like this happens and people are facing voter intimidation, and they come and they pastor and they de-escalate and they help people through those situations, and we'll typically only call law enforcement if they feel like there is immediate danger.
So to our audience, if you have any problems at the poll, please dial 866 Our Vote, and make sure that you can talk to someone and they'll be able to provide you with all the resources if you're facing any issues outside of the election this year. Another question that came from our audience is, can I wear my swag inside of the Board of Elections? So can I have a no on issue 22 shirt or yes on this inside of the Board of Elections or your polling location?
Elisabeth, I'll let you take this one.
Or no, you have to, once you are within 100 feet of a polling location, it's considered electioneering to have, candidate or yes or no. That said, if it's a little less obvious than that, so if it's a political shirt or maybe the colors of a certain candidate, I think it's pretty unlikely that anything's going to happen or anybody's going to say anything to you. But if you have an election that it's Bob versus Billy and you wear a Billy shirt, they're probably going to say turn it inside out or go home and change.
So please make sure you're in uniform to vote. There is a uniform. There are requirements to vote. Unfortunately, we live in Ohio. So make sure that if you are out, there'll be a lot of people out supporting their candidates or a specific issue. If you do plan to vote that day, make sure you have a coat, which many people should have on because it looks like it's going to be a little chilly. But please don't let the weather either discourage you from coming to vote. Make sure that you come vote. One other question says, how many feet outside of the election poll can you be to promote your issue or candidate?
100 feet.
And it'll be marked by a flag. And every polling location, one of the main kind of setup things that they do is they plant 2 flags at the beginning of the 100 feet mark. And nobody, unless you are there to vote, you are not allowed past the 100-foot mark for any reason, whether it be to electioneer or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So no fighting outside the polls. To our audience, you have to be 100 feet outside. We know it gets a little pretentious out there when people are very passionate about their issues that we'll be voting on. One of the last questions I have as we round out the night, I know it's a bipartisan conversation, but from your both of you perspective, what do you anticipate voter turnout to look like in Ohio? We saw a great turnout in our special election. Do you think we will continue to see that in our general election?
I'll say something and then I'll let
We're both
Elisabeth.
like, you have a thing to say.
I'll say this. This has been a year in Ohio, and in August, it was an unprecedented election, and I called many boards of elections to ask them that same question. What do you think voter participation will look like? And they're the experts. They run elections, right? And they had no idea. I was getting participation rates ranging from 8% to 50%, because nobody knows. We've never had a statewide election in August, right? And so, I mean, it depends on how you look at it, because and we had a almost 40% turnout rate. And yeah, if you compare that to other August special elections, that's fantastic. But if you ask me, that kind of participation rate for a statewide election is awful. And that should not be okay for us, right? And so it kind of all depends on how you're looking at it. So again, we have local elections, election nerd here. And I think every election is important and everybody should come out for every election. But the reality is that local elections are typically a 15 to 25% turnout rate. That's just the way it is, right? But we have two statewide issues on the ballot. So it's really hard because that's not a thing. Like that's not typically something we do. So it's hard to gauge exactly what that's gonna look like. What I fear is that the people that are the most affected by the statewide issues are the people who vote in the lowest numbers, right? And the people who are most passionate about the statewide issues that are on the ballot are the people who vote in the lowest numbers. And so please go vote. Like, this is it, folks. This is your chance to do a thing and to have real impact on what this state looks like for people, right? Poor people, Black and brown people, are the people who, God forbid, if somebody, gets into an issue and they need an abortion, it is much more difficult for people of low income to leave the state and have to get an abortion. If we are left, I don't want to influence anybody's vote. Like, that's not what I'm here to do. You can vote one way or the other. But I'm just saying, like, if you feel a certain way, like, we gotta get out to vote. So I hope it's 100%. What do I think? I don't know.
Like, nobody knows anything. I mean, honestly,
we don't. Yeah.
You really,
I
mean, there are some indicators that give hints. So people look at early voting turnout. People look at sort of the numbers by county, and those are up. But to Nazek's point, up compared to what? Not up like, oh, now they're going to be 100%. So, like something that we talk about all the time is that local elections are where people can have the most impact because there are fewer voters voting and because it's things that are directly impacting your community. So your school board, your mayor, your city council, your police, like all these people have like they are impacting our life. Like when my kid walks to school, when my trash is getting picked up, like how safe I am. All these things are so important for us, and they have the lowest turnout, which is terrible. But the opportunity for voters is that you have the bigger impact in an election like this.
I'm very passionate about local elections. I could talk to you about this till tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
I wrote like a whole thesis paper on this. Low turnout in local elections. It's tragic that people are not voting on the things that make an impact on their everyday lives. and just, I don't know what else to say. Go vote.
Yeah, and people don't vote because they don't feel like they know enough, like they don't feel confident about their vote, but there are resources out there that can support you. And I will just give us a plug that our website, the lwvohio.org, has some really great resources about this election in particular, but also just how this all works. What does it mean to be a mayor? What does it mean to be a county commissioner? How do you reach out to your state senator? That kind of stuff. It's not that people don't care. It's not that people don't want to impact their communities. It's that they don't know how, and they don't want to make the wrong decision. So we want to be able to help people with that.
So then that's something all three of us have in common, who are election nerds who wrote papers on local elections.
Awesome.
As an election nerd myself, hi Langston. Okay. My son has decided to interrupt us. He's been to the voting location as well. But one of the other questions that came through is, can I take a selfie of myself voting and post it on social media?
I mean,
go for it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. This is,
who among us has not done such a thing?
Yeah. Just go ahead.
Yeah.
What are they going to do?
And it's promoting civic engagement.
Yes, I would just be careful not to get anybody in your picture. Definitely
Right.
don't get anybody's machine in your picture. But like, just make sure that it's just you in your, space. You can definitely not take a picture of other people voting. Yeah.
And most boards of elections, if you're doing early vote, have a selfie wall set up that you can go. Yeah. And do a selfie in front. And usually there are people who actually will take your picture too, because they know, they get it.
Well, please snap as many selfies so we can have an indicator who's actually voting. I said that these past elections post-COVID are just hard to predict because voters have been up and down and dealing with a lot. So hopefully, us nerds will get better data as voting moves along post-COVID. And so as we wind down our conversation, I want to give you two a couple minutes, just say any closing words, anything that we should do, any cost to action outside of vote, please feel free to share.
I will say that if you are so inclined, there is so much that you can do to help make sure that our democracy works and that it works for everyone. We are recruiting election protection volunteers until the very last moment. If you want more information about that, please look us up, lwvohio.org, and give me a call and I will connect you. There's a lot of different things that you can do. If you also are so inclined, I'm sure there's still time for you to be a poll worker. We always have poll worker shortages all over Ohio. If the time frame is too short for you now to do it, please consider being a poll worker in the future. Poll workers are really like the frontline workers of our democracy. And when we don't have enough poll workers, our elections don't work. There's lots of things that you can do. Please consider becoming a member of the League of Women Voters. There's lots that you can do at the League to help make sure that everybody has access to the ballot. But there's a role for everybody to play in making sure that our democracy works for everyone. And it's really important, because if we don't, then it's not going to work for everyone.
Yeah, 100. And I would say one of the things that kind of keeps me up at night is the spread of disinformation, and we're really seeing it in this election. And it really is a threat to democracy, because if people don't have facts when they're voting, then it skews the whole thing. It suppresses votes and it makes people vote in ways that don't actually reflect their values and their beliefs. And so I think it's something that we as individuals can do. Certainly we as the League do it, and I bet you all do it as an organization too. But as individual humans, we all have voices, we all have platforms, we have social media, we have friends, we have family, we have our faith communities, we have our political communities. There are all kinds of places that you can speak up and say, here are facts. And we don't have to tell anybody what to think or what to believe. But facts are sort of non-negotiable. And so what I would say is a really important thing that every single one of us can do is seek out the truth and talk about the truth and share the truth. And again, I'll plug us. We have some pretty great resources on our site and on our social platforms too. So you can go to League of Women Voters on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or again, our websites at lwvohio.org.
And make sure your people are voting. Call your friends, call your family, call your aunties and uncles.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure works. Like this is positive peer pressure. Get your people out to vote.
Yeah. And the thing about selfies is that you are modeling good behavior. So like keep it up. Keep showing people that this is an awesome thing to do.
So everyone that has a family group chat, put a sample ballot in it. Make sure that they know who to vote for. Put resources and links to the League of Women Voters website, and also put 866-R-VOTE. Make sure that you have 866-R-VOTE in your phone, just because we know that people face a lot of barriers when it comes to voting, and we have this awesome resources there to help. So to all of our viewers, make sure you go out and vote. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Ohio. Thank you to Black environmental leaders for continuing to educate our community and make sure that our BIPOC voices are heard. So with that, good night, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Happy voting, everybody.